I'm willing to say that Arch Manning is the most anticipated college football prospect in the history of the sport. I even went back and did some digging. And then a couple of things with Arch. Number one, we've waited 2 years. Like, we remember when Arch went to Texas. And we're like, all right, he'll sit behind Quinn Ewers a year. Ewers will transfer somewhere else. No, Ewers stayed there. Ewers could have stayed another year. But obviously, it was Arch Manning time after this most recent year, especially after the college football playoff and how that shook out. I think Quinn Ewers was injured in that game versus Ohio State. I think Sark, it was a detriment maybe sticking with Ewers. We'll listen to some sound here in a second. But I am willing to say Arch Manning is the most anticipated college football prospect in the history of the sport. Because of Peyton Manning, because of his grandfather, because of the pedigree that he draws when people look down on the stat sheet and go, look down at the box score and see that Manning name right next to him. Now, the digging that I alluded to, Peyton was obviously a huge prospect, huge player, the son of the grandfather whose name is eluding me. My age is showing. But regardless, Peyton, a big one. I think Terrell Pryor had a lot of buzz, being from Pennsylvania, not wanting to go to Penn State, then going to Ohio State. Ron Paulus, the 1992 Notre Dame Fighting Irish, and then Jimmy Clausen. So 2 Irish players wrapping that up with Jimmy Clausen, Ron Paulus, Terrell Pryor, and Peyton Manning. But, Christian, it feels like we've been robbed a little bit of Arch Manning because of him waiting his turn. I think there's something to be said about the player. He waited his turn behind Quinn Ewers, and now it's his opportunity to show up and show out in I believe his junior year.
There's a reason why the backup quarterback is the most popular guy in town on a bad football team.
Right.
You can only think he's going to be good. When you have the stars attached to your 24/7 sports profile and you have the last name and you're playing football for freaking Texas.
Right.
Like, that is the trifecta of high expectations and no reason for us to believe that he won't reach those expectations.
888-760-3776. That is the number to get on into the show. Russo and Rizzo. I'm going through my 5 biggest things heading into our college football season. We're 45 days and 20 hours away from week 0. Number 1 on my list, Arch Manning. The birth of Arch Manning, the start of Arch Manning and his football career. I almost said professional football career. I got to realize it's still college, even though, we could sit here and argue if it is professional football at this point with the money they're getting paid. But regardless, Arch Manning, I think, is the biggest football prospect, most anticipated football prospect in the history of the sport. Let's take it a step further and listen to what Paul Feinbaum had to say about Arch Manning, because he agrees with me. And he's willing to take it a step further and compare him to a former Heisman Trophy winner.
The absolute roof. I think there's a reasonably good chance that Arch Manning will be sitting on the front row in New York at the Heisman ceremony. That's assuming that his team does what it's supposed to do and compete for not only the SEC, but for the national championship. And I really believe they will. I think Steve Sarkisian, who's one of the most amazing play callers I've ever seen, made a critical mistake late in the year. He was way too loyal to Quinn Ewers, who was banged up and was really ineffective. Had Arch Manning been instituted in the second half of that game, like Nick Saban did a couple of years ago with Tagovailoa, I think there's a reasonably good chance that Texas would have beaten Ohio State and won the national championship. They're very capable of doing it again this year. I believe also that Arch Manning is the best college football quarterback we have seen since Tim Tebow entered the scene in 2006.
Christian, he hasn't even played a full season, and he's comparing him to Tim Tebow. Tim Tebow, the most dominant college football player I've ever seen in my lifetime. I'm 30. The 2 players that I go to, Tim Tebow and Reggie Bush, those were probably the 2 most dominant college football players I saw on the offensive end. And the mouth of the South, Paul Feinbaum, is willing to already compare him to Tim Tebow without playing a full season. Hence what I just said. He is the most anticipated prospect in the history of the sport. And I think a lot of it has to do with the last name, but Tebow certainly I think it's crazy to me making those references at that time, hence the nickname, the Mouth of the South. Now, number two, Christian, it's got to be Penn State. And similar, I think James Franklin and Sark are in similar territory. They're great coaches. They just haven't won the big one. Texas's last championship was 2005 with Mac Brown and Vince Young and that unbelievable comeback they had against USC. I think that's probably the best college football game I've seen to date, 2005, the national championship. And then Penn State in 1986. I'll take it a step further with Penn State. Their last Big Ten title was 2016. So, and Christian, you being an alum of Penn State, you know all of this. You know the 4-18 record that Franklin has versus Ohio State, Oregon, and Michigan. But two similar coaches with Sark and Franklin, and both teams bringing back a lot of veterans. Both teams bringing back players that arguably could have moved on to greener pastures, maybe the NFL. You got the two running backs with Allen and Singletary coming back for Penn State. You got Drew Aller, who a lot of people maybe expected to be a first-round pick if he decided to go to the draft. This is going to be a big year for Penn State, Christian, and I really, it screams Ohio State and Michigan, the last two champions. Players coming back that had the option to go to the league and greener pastures, and a veteran-based team with a veteran-based quarterback, Michigan, J.J. McCarthy, last year Ohio State, and Will Howard. Are your expectations championship or bust for this Penn State team, Christian?
Make the championship or bust. I like to take it one step at a time. Last year, Penn State got as far as they ever have had in the playoff era in college football. You referenced 2016. They won the Big Ten. Were not admitted into the 4-team college football playoff. They were left out of it that year and never did make the 4-team college football playoff. And then on the first year, they expanded to 12 teams. Penn State makes the final 4 of the college football playoff. Different way to get there, a path that was the yellow brick road going through a gauntlet of SMU and Boise State. So truth be told, Penn State didn't really prove too much when you got to later in the season when those are the two teams they knocked off. Sure, they gave a fight to Notre Dame, but that's kind of the same old story. Penn State has given a fight to a lot of strong opponents before, and they have come up short, like the Michigan, like the Ohio State in those situations. It's make the national championship game or bust due to how many cast of characters that are returning from last year's team. And the one difference I find between James Franklin and Steve Sarkisian, it's just that Penn State has been knocking on the door for longer. Right, like Sarkisian is going into his 5th year, I believe, as a head coach at Texas, and they've been competitive the last 2 years, and now we're expecting something very great for them. They are co-favorites with Georgia to win the national championship this year. Penn State's 4th on that list at plus 650, whereas James Franklin's been knocking on the door ever since 2017, where they went into 2017 season, ran the same thing back with the same quarterback, with Saquon Barkley, with a lot of the same characters, and they weren't able to get it done a 2-loss season that year. So I would say that the fan base is more tired of Franklin than Texas's fan base is more tired and expecting the Sarkisian right now, even though Texas a bigger brand than Penn State.
Completely agree.